Hello everyone, today I'm going to do a brief review of the Cypher System rulebook written by Monty Cook, Bruce R. Cordell and Sean K. Reynolds. What is the Cypher System? The Cypher System is a tabletop role-playing system, engine if you like, that is completely world agnostic and is therefore the first of its kind that I have read. All of the other rule books, maybe with the exception of Monster of the Week, although that is kind of has its world because it's usually set in our world. This is the first one that I've ever read that doesn't come with a world. So what this means is if and when you buy this book and you read it through, you will not be able to just sit down and say, okay, there's a starting adventure that I can download from the internet. There is something that explains to me what the world is like, if there is gods, what their names are, if there is magic, how it works, if it's modern, if it's sci-fi. It doesn't tell you anything like that. It's more a way of creating, and I really think, come to think of it, it's really about creating characters for players to inhabit a world that you as the GM have either taken from somewhere else or designed yourself. It is one of two RPG rule books that I thoroughly enjoyed reading and read from cover to cover in one go. It is extremely well written. I haven't found a single typo, and it is right up there with the rulebook to the One Ring first edition, which, although I don't like the system at all and I think it's inherently flawed, is an excellent read. Cypher System rulebook is just the same thing. It's an excellent read and I highly recommend it. If you are into role-playing games at all, even if you're not going to run it, I recommend it because it's a book, again, that gives you lots of ideas as a GM, that gives you lots of ideas of how to create stories even, or how to build a story from the ground up. But it is also a book that you would give not only to the GM, but also to the player. Because the players, if they are going to use the Cypher System with you, will need it. So most of this book, and it clocks in at over 400 pages, 442 to be exact, plus an index, which is really good. It's an excellent index. This book contains mainly the rules for creating the characters. And when you look at the intro here, you can see that characters start at 13 and go on until page 204. Then you have a very small, comparatively small list of genres in which you can use the characters that you create over these 200 pages. And then there is some information about game mastering. You have creatures, so basically enemies, foes, anything from replicants to wendigos, NPCs that you could encounter, ciphers, which are the objects that the Cypher System is named after, and then how to run the Cypher System. This is essentially something that you find in other role-playing DM guides, but it is very much tailored towards how to use the system itself. Some of it I thought was well explained. Some of it, probably because of my experience, didn't really seem as relevant, but I think, you know, if you've never played a role-playing game before or run a role-playing game before, I think this is going to be quite helpful. There is one thing that I will say about this game. There is something called GM intrusion, which is a way of awarding XP. So you can say during the game, I'm going to offer you a GM intrusion, and then the player can say yes, and if they accept it, you award them 1 XP and they get a second XP that they need to award to somebody else. Or or they say, no, I'm not going to accept this GM intrusion and have to spend an XP instead to decline it. So GM intrusions are explained as things where you actually, because you don't roll dice as a DM, make a decision to alter the story. And while I totally understand how this works, and while there is a very good example of how this system is played that I'm going to link in the description of this video, the way it is described in this book is, I don't know, it left me uneasy a little bit, because to me it seemed to be almost an excuse for saying, okay, we want you to use DM intrusions to make things difficult. Yeah, no problem, but they are not necessarily linked to someone botching a roll. But you can add them when you see fit. And one example was that there is an adventure hook that is in a village that the PCs are in, but they decide not to go for it. But you really want them to go for it. So you basically say they leave the village, so that's in a fantasy setting, and they encounter a snake which attacks one of them. So obviously this attack has to work, otherwise the whole DM intrusion doesn't work. And the character gets poisoned, and they need a really, really hard to find antitoxin. But the DM essentially explains, well, this can be found in the village, so that the people go back to the village and then find the hook plus the antitoxin. And that's called a GM intrusion, and for this they would get awarded XP. Now, I find that really strange, because that's the way I wouldn't do it. I mean, this is one way of gaining XP. There is another way if you for example, complete tasks, if you complete milestones or between sessions. But the examples in the chapter about GM intrusion are, to me, unconvincing. They are actually the club them over the head examples of when a DM does things. But that's just maybe me, and I'm just going to switch the camera. So yeah, that's better. But that may just be me, or maybe it's just that the examples that they chose simply don't appeal to me. I find it very ham-fisted, the way they are explaining the DM intrusion. And also, I mean, to say, okay, I'm going to offer you a GM intrusion, and then this is used to actually further the plot. Yes, you can do it, but I have to say that the description is very unelegant. If you want to see very elegant ways of DM intrusions, I suggest you watch the Doors of Danera, which is linked below. So basically, how do you use this book? Well, first of all, you use this book if you already have a world as a DM and you want to use the rule set by making a decision. What kind of a world do you have? So is it a fantasy world, modern science fiction, horror, or is the type you want to run a horror game? That could be, in any setting, but usually it would be modern or maybe post-apocalyptic. You want to run a fairy tale or a historical game. And then you can make a decision what kind of characters you will allow. And this is where this section, those 200 odd or those 190 odd pages come in about characters, because this is in my opinion, the meat of the system. You have the type, which is also called character class in other systems, and you only have 4. Now this may sound very limiting, but when we look at it in more depth, it will actually become quite clear that it isn't. Because the 4 types you have are warrior, explorer, speaker, adept. And once you look at them more closely, you realize that they are basically archetypes. They are hyperonyms for a lot of hyperonyms. Like the warrior in the fantasy and fairy tale genre would be the warrior, the fighter, the swordsman, the knight, the barbarian, the soldier, the myrmidon, or the Valkyrie. In science fiction, they would be the security officer, warrior, trooper, soldier, merc, superhero, post-apocalyptic, hero, brick, bruiser. And likewise with the adept, that would be your magic users. It can also be your cleric, your druid, your seer, your diabolist in the fantasy fairy tale genre, or it could be a psionicist, a telepath, an ESPer, a mage or sorcerer, depending on where you play and what you play. And the same goes for the explorer and the speaker. And that's really all there is. You make a decision what kind of game you play. So if you're not playing a game that has any magic in it and no gods to speak of that could interfere with the normal flow of life, you would probably not have adepts, and you would probably also say you can't have priests. However, if you do, then you can make a decision, what kind of magic users do you have? What can they do? Then you have 3 stats, and only 3. Might, which is essentially your prowess when it comes to, I don't know, being strong, taking damage, that kind of thing. Intellect, so anything to do with interaction, charm, being intelligent, using your brain. And then the speed, which you use, for example, for walking really fast, running, but also dexterity-based things. So, for example, if you are in melee combat, you can either use might as your stat if you're using brute force, or if it's a finesse weapon, you might use the speed stat. But if you're in ranged combat, it is only the speed stat because it's all about dexterity. Unless, of course, you're casting a spell, in which case it would be intellect. And basically then you have these 3 stats and you get a starting pool of points in it. And you use those points later in the game to trigger abilities, to do things. But once you have used the points, they are gone from your temporary pool. So your temporary pool keeps diminishing and you need to rest or to regain them in some way. There are regain rolls that you can use. But I think that there are also abilities that help other people regain some of their pools. Then you also, at character creation, find out, for example, what your person can do. So if we look at the adept, they have an effort of 1. Effort and edge are things that you can use to modify the spend of your pool points. That's something that I'm not going to explain in this because it doesn't really matter. You will have to figure this out yourselves. It's well explained, but it's one of the ones that is a little more detailed. There is very little maths involved in this system. There is very little or no statistics actually involved in this system. There are just a couple of things you have to remember. It's really a narrative game. And also the way you create your character is also a narrative creation process. Then there is information about the starting equipment, what weapons they can use, what special abilities, and then basically you start by going into the details straight away. So, as I've just said, it's a narrative game, and I have to say it really is. When you look at games like D&D or DSA, where you have like 1 gazillion ways of doing combat, you have special abilities, you have flavors, and I have an ability to use a two-handed weapon in such a way that, and they give them all those great names, there is the windmill and the high blade and blah, 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 blah. And then you do full frontal assault or storm assault or all of these things. And at the end of the day, how this works is you spend a lot of experience points on gaining those abilities. Then you sit at the table, especially with DSA, you do a lot of maths and you say, well, I'm going to use this, this, this. And I remember one example where we were playing DSA, and there was this character that had a very interesting fighting style, which they had paid lots of experience points for. So essentially, after sitting down and declaring the attack and saying, this is what I'm going to do, and explaining exactly what the story behind this ability is, it turns out that after listening to this for about a minute and getting my head around it as a DM, what it did was it gave them +1 to attack and -1 in the next round to the defender. So at the end of the day, a lot of the stuff in some of those really overburdened game systems is a way of spending a lot of AP or XP, depending on adventure points, experience points, whatever you want to call them, on something that sounds cool and looks cool on paper, but at the end of the day, at the gaming table, it adds nothing because it does +1 or -1 to a die roll. So here it's completely different. You don't have that. You have many abilities, but they are very, very different in nature. They really describe what your character can do. And they are a lot less, I would say, dependent on one another and also a lot less cumbersome to manage. So it's a narrative game. And the narrativity starts at character creation because, and I'm a linguist and that's why this really appealed to me when I first read it. I was like, oh, this is so cool. You create your character. And you create it by saying a statement. And the statement is, I am an adjective, noun, who, verbs. And that sounds really weird, but I find this is probably the most narrative way you can do this. And an example would be, I am a rugged, adjective, warrior, noun, who controls beasts, verb. Or I'm a charming explorer who focuses mind over matter. And these points, the adjective, the noun, and the verb, form your character. So you could say that you would like to play, you have this idea that you want to play a person who's a warrior and who fights for the rights of the poor and helps the poor and helps those that are disenfranchised. And you are inherently a good person. So you can make a statement like, I'm a good knight who serves the poor, or whatever, something along those lines. This could be different from genre to genre and will be different from genre to genre. But what this game book does for you is it'll give you the wherewithal to turn these ideas that the players have, and they of course have to fit your world. I mean, if this is a sci-fi world, you know, like gritty, hard science fiction, then, oh, I'm a little fairy who blah, 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 it doesn't work. That's clear. But usually you would explain to your players what kind of a game you're playing, what kind of a world this is set in. And then you can take the players' ideas and put them into this book and come up with the correct wording for it that fits the book so that you can find them. So let's stay with this. So we have the good. So we have the good knight. So we know already knight is type warrior. There's no doubt about it. So then they are good. So here we've got the descriptors. They could be beneficent, which would work. So that would mean that they are helping others and this is their calling. It's why they're here. They delight in their others delight in their outgoing and charitable nature, and you delight in their happiness. You're at your best when you're aiding people, which is what they do. So this is something that this could be. Probably cruel or craven would not be suitable descriptors. It could also be kind, for example. So let's take a look at kind. And of course, when you say you're beneficent, this means you're going to get certain abilities. So allies who have spent the last day with you add +1 to their recovery rolls. So that's this idea that, you know, some knights are so good, they're paladins, they have some healing powers. You're altruistic. If you're standing next to a creature that takes damage, you can intercede and take 1 point of that damage for yourself. Skill. You're trained in all tasks related to pleasant social interaction, putting other people at ease and gaining trust. Helpful. Whenever you help another character, that character gains the benefit as if you were trained, even if you're not trained or specialized in the attempted task. Inability, it does have a drawback. While you're alone, all intellect and speed tasks are hindered. So you are somebody that actually takes energy from others in a positive way as well. Then when we look at kind, so we turn to kind. You get +2 to your intellect pool because you're emotionally intuitive. You are somebody that you are really sympathetic to what other people want and need. But being kind takes time, and yours is limited. You've learned that that a small fraction of people don't deserve your time or kindness. So you're not just the goody two-shoes. There are people that you won't be kind to. So you're probably not a paladin. You're trained in all tasks related to pleasant social interaction and discerning the dispositions of others. Karma. Sometimes strangers just help you. You know, somebody might just walk up to you and help you for no apparent reason. It's because you've got good karma. This is something that the GM would determine. But you are unable to detect falsehoods, for example. So whenever you try this, you try to gain insight into somebody, then you might have a minus to those rolls. So these are ways to describe. You could also be hardy. You could also be resilient, you know, or simply strong, or virtuous is also one that you could have in this particular role as a descriptor. So let's just say we are or honorable. Honorable might even be more appropriate still. You are trustworthy, fair and forthright. You try to do what is right to help others and to treat them well. Yes. Lying and cheating are no way to get ahead. These things are for the weak, the lazy or the despicable. You probably spend a lot of time thinking about your personal honor, how best to maintain it and how to defend it if challenged. In combat, you are straightforward and offer quarter to any foe. Yeah. You gain +2 to your might pool. You are trained in pleasant social interactions. You are trained in discerning people's true motives or seeing through lies. So basically, this would really be one way of describing your warrior. And now we will see what their focus is. And we said it's somebody who helps the poor, who helps the people who need help, who helps the disenfranchised. And here you have now a list of foci, and that is long. And it helps you add the verb. So that's over, let me see, that's easily 20 pages. Okay. So, abides in stone, probably not. Blazes with radiance, probably not. Controls beasts, highly unlikely. Defends the gate, for example. Everyone wants you on their side when it comes to a fight. Could work. Defends the weak. Here we are. You stand up for the helpless, the weak and the unprotected. So basically, this makes it possible for you to take you get one of these abilities. So tier 1 would be courageous or warding shield. You just choose one. So when you then build your character, you choose these abilities for the type, and then you get an ability for this. And so you basically go through, you can then go to the abilities that you have that come with this and really just build your character based on the narrative of the story that you would like to tell. And that is something that I really, really like about it. And although it is, I would say, a lot to do for the DM when they are building the world, or if they use a world that already exists to see what works, you end up with a really rich tapestry for each player. So for example, this focus here meets out justice. When I look at this picture, I mean, I immediately want to play this person because she's kind of awesome. Having said this, the art is very sparse in this book, but what art there is, I really liked. But, you know, these are all things that help you build a story around your characters, and those would then enter the world that you as the DM have chosen to play in. Next, we also have character arcs, which they spend quite a lot of time on, I found, and I really liked it because it really explained how character arcs work. And by character arcs, we needn't kind of like think, okay, there is a lot of, you know, oh, everything is my dark past, blah, blah, blah. But it is usually something that doesn't even necessarily last that long. Let's see, character arc, page 238. A character arc should be something, can be something that can be completed in a couple of sessions, you know. So let's see. They also break down how character arcs work. You have an opening, you have several steps, or maybe just one that needs to be fulfilled. Each results in a reward of 2 XP, and then a climax, and then a resolution. So the character arcs, usually, I think there is an example of how long they should last. Yeah. Usually you get the first one for free when you start the adventure, and then you have to pay for using 1 XP per arc. I'm not quite sure why this is the case, because my characters usually just gain arcs because things happen to them that they want to resolve, and I don't see why I would make them pay for it. So a little bit of a warning here. Some of the stuff, how they use XP, I find strange. And I would have to try this out in a game that I run to see, does it work for me. In some cases, I'm like, I don't understand why you have to spend XP on this one, but that's fine. So while it's not necessary that everyone has a character arc, it is highly encouraged, and I would do that too. But I think most people also have character arcs without even knowing it, because they have things that they would like to do. But here are a couple of example arcs, and I thought that they were really interesting because, interestingly enough, I have used or am using some of them without even knowing that having really thought about them. So aid a friend, of course, avenge, but also birth is an arc, which the opening is actually impregnation. I thought that was funny. Develop a bond, explore, fall from grace, creation, join an organization, mysterious background, restoration, rescue, romance. You want to basically strike up a romantic relationship with somebody, repay a debt, uncover a secret, undo a wrong. But of course, you are free to choose your own. The character players can come up with their own, but they then have to basically discuss it with you. But I think it's interesting to see that they write them down like this, and that they also use them later in the game to make people pay for them with XP. That's something that I find odd. But hey, that's the way it is. And then the next part of the book, part 3, is devoted to genres. And I really want to point this out because all of this, as I said, is super generic. We said the adept can be anything that has some kind of non-natural, supernatural power. But how does that actually translate in a game? Let's say in a fantasy game or in a sci-fi game. And this is where the genre chapter comes in. So, for example, here we have the fantasy game, and here you have the suggested types. So you have the warrior, which would be the character type warrior. You have the cleric, which interestingly enough is not an adept, but they suggest speaker flavored with magic, because you can also flavor people with something. That's also a possibility. Then it gives you information about which foci you could use. They are suggested. You don't have to use them. You can also limit them. You can also say that some of them won't work or that you want additional ones. And there's also a toolbox on how to create new foci. Then also which creatures you might have. And the creatures are statted and in the book. So you do get a list, a bestiary in this book. Then also equipment, because they basically reduce the list of equipment or the type of equipment depending on the price. Inexpensive, moderately priced, expensive and very expensive, and exorbitant items. And they basically also form part and parcel of what you get when you first start out. There is no surprise there. But they give you ideas as to what this could be, so that you can choose from this. And of course, if you have books like I think it's the DM guide for D&D, you get a lot of fantasy related things that you could have, like items, etc., artifacts. Then of course you have artifacts that you can have. In this case, they also have species descriptors for usual fantasy species like dwarf, elf, hellborn, and half-giant. It's interesting that they spell hellborn with only one L, but since they consistently spell it so, it's not a mistake. Then you've got the modern era. Again, what kind of role could you play and what kind of type would this correspond to? So the lawyer would be a speaker, the criminal would be an explorer with a stealth flavor. Yeah. Suggested foci, and so on and so forth. And this takes you through everything from, like I said, fantasy to science fiction to horror to fairy tale. And I have to say, and romance was one of the ones where it's like, okay, that's interesting to say, okay, they're going to play. I can't really imagine this, but hey, it's definitely fine. If this is what you guys want to do, then you've got post-apocalyptic, and then you've got the fairy tale. And I really had to read this because I'd never actually given it any thought that fairy tale is its own genre, but it's really well explained, and I really enjoyed reading this. And then the next chapter already starts, or the next part is already game mastering. It starts with the creatures, and it gives you the levels of these creatures. It gives you information on what they do. I think everyone gets their own picture. Yeah. And of course, the point is, if you say, oh, I really want to have X in my game and it's not in the book, doesn't matter. You just say X is, the devil is now whatever you chose to have there, or demon is very generic. You just pop in the name that suits you. So once you know what kind of a creature you would like to have, you can just take a creature that's basically similar from the level and what it can do, and you can use these as templates. So it's not a problem at all. But if you're experienced, then you can do this very easily. And then you've got the ciphers. Ciphers are essentially things, and I want to say things because it's a bit difficult. There are the ones that are corporeal, that you can actually touch, and then there are the ones that cannot really be touched. And they are non-physical, and they basically are supposed to drive the game. So they are once-off things that you can use, like an ability. So for example, you suddenly have the ability to set fire to something with your eyes. That could be a cipher. You don't usually have this ability, but you gained a cipher that makes it possible for you to use it. And those ciphers go away after one use. They are not artifacts that you can use multiple times or forever, because, for example, they are special and they cannot be depleted, but they are single-use things. And they are supposed to be handed out to characters, and each character has a limit as to how many they can carry at any given moment in time. Usually it's about 2 to 3. And the idea is that players should use them freely and should use them to, to good effect and to beef up the game. This is kind of alien to me, the concept, because the games that I usually play don't really even have that much of a... they're essentially low fantasy, where you don't even have artifacts that are in any way special, and if you have them or if you want them, they are so expensive that it's really difficult to get them anyway. So this idea of having those treasures that you can use to give you effects like the armor reinforcer or the attractor, one unanchored item, the user size or smaller within long range is drawn immediately to them. To me, that is completely... I find that strange. That doesn't mean that I wouldn't use it, and I'm not criticizing it, but it's something that I would have to think long and hard about, because they kind of seem to be a deus ex machina for me, or they could turn into that. So I think it really is something that I would have to get used to. And I also don't think that I would hand them out with the frequency that they hand them out, because I would like them to remain special. But that's just personal preference. And it doesn't really say that you can't play Cypher without handing them out like so many sweets to players. So, anyway, this is Cypher System rulebook. It's highly recommended. If you have a world but you're looking for an engine, check this out. If you have a world and an engine but you would like to switch out the engine, check this out. I will do a character creation for a character that already exists in one of my games, and is using this particular engine that is defined for this particular world that the game is set in. I'm going to redo it using the Cypher system just to show how this works, and just to also see for myself if the Cypher system is as satisfactory as I think it will be. But nonetheless, I really would like to recommend it. It's also from a quality perspective, it's a great book. The editor did a marvelous job. Like I said, I haven't found a single typo. You can tell that it is written by a group of experts, because the writing is excellent. You can read it through. I read it through in half a day. Of course, you don't really read through every single ability when you just read through the storytelling part, and when you just read through how you basically form a character. You don't have to read through every single ability in order to do a review. So of course I haven't read every single word on every single page. But it gives you everything that you need. And I understand that there are at least 2 gaming worlds that use this. One is called Numenera, on which this is essentially also based. And another one is called The Strange. I don't know anything about The Strange. I know some things about Numenera. It's been around for a good while. And what I know about it, the premise was one that made me immediately go, I'm not interested. But not because of the engine, but simply because of the world. However, I understand that there are also other books that complement this one, where the Cypher system is used, but it's a lot less generic, but really geared towards playing in a particular environment, maybe even world that has been designed to help people get started with this. So talk to you soon. Thanks for listening. Bye bye.